Even dead things deserve to be held gently. Emily Carter did not know why those words came to her as she crossed the frozen square of Raven Hollow with the silver-white pup limp in her arms. Maybe because no one else would touch him. Maybe because the entire pack had already decided he was nothing more than a bad omen. A small broken body found too close to the northern border on the very night the Alpha King was expected to arrive. The pup's fur was soft beneath her fingers, pale as winter moonlight and streaked with dark mud from the pine woods. His head rested against the bend of her elbow, too still, too light, as if the cold had already begun stealing him away from the world. Around her, torches hissed in the wind. Snow dusted the stone path in thin white lines. Nearly 200 wolves had gathered near the old meeting circle, dressed in polished boots, dark coats, and ceremonial cloaks, all waiting for the royal procession from the north. Emily felt their eyes turn before she heard the first laugh. It came sharp and bright from Madison Vale, who stood near the center steps in a velvet cloak the color of red wine, her blonde hair pinned with silver combs. "You have to be kidding," Madison said, covering her mouth as if the sight delighted her too much to hide. "The cursed Omega brought us a corpse." A ripple moved through the crowd, half laughter, half disgust. Emily stopped 10 feet from the healer's tent, her shoes slipping slightly on the frosted stones. She held the pup closer. "He was in the woods," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Near the old trail. Please, someone needs to look at him." The pack healer, a narrow man with tired eyes, took one glance at the bundle in her arms and stepped back. "Emily, he's gone. You didn't check." "I don't need to." His tone softened, but only a little. "There's nothing to do. Nothing to do." Emily knew those words. They had followed her since childhood, since the first time her wolf came late and weak, since the first ceremony where no alpha looked twice at her, since the elders began calling her moonless under their breath. Nothing to do with an Omega who could not command a room, could not fight, could not make anyone proud by simply existing. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now back to Emily. She looked down at the pup again. A small crescent mark curved through the fur beneath his ear, pale gold against white. Something about it made her chest ache. Not fear, not hope. Something older, softer, like hearing a cry after everyone else had chosen silence. Madison stepped closer, her smile thin. "Do you realize what tonight is? King Alexander North is coming here. The Northern Alpha King. And you walk into the square carrying that." Emily swallowed. Beyond the gate, the black pines leaned under the wind, and somewhere far off, a horn sounded once, low and distant. The royal party was near. The crowd shifted with sudden excitement, but Madison's eyes stayed on Emily. "Throw it away before he sees you." Emily's fingers tightened around the pup. She thought of finding him beneath the burned tree, the snow around him disturbed by tracks that vanished toward the ridge. She thought of kneeling there until her knees went numb, whispering to him though he could not answer, because leaving him alone had felt crueler than carrying him back. "No," Emily said. The square went quiet enough for the torches to be heard. Madison blinked, then laughed again, louder this time, inviting everyone to join her. "Did you hear that? The little Omega thinks she can refuse." A few voices chuckled. Someone muttered that dead things belonged outside the borders. Someone else said Emily had always attracted strange luck. The words pressed against her skin like cold rain, but she did not move. She only bowed her head over the pup, shielding him from the wind with her worn gray shawl. For one fragile second, she imagined she felt something beneath her palm. Not a heartbeat, not truly, just the memory of one, faint and impossible, like a spark buried under ash. Her breath caught. Madison noticed. "Oh, don't tell me you think you can save it." Emily did not answer. She was listening past the laughter, past the horn in the distance, past the snow scratching over stone. The pup was silent in her arms, yet something inside her had begun to tremble awake. And above Raven Hollow, hidden behind a veil of cloud, the moon waited. Emily had learned that silence could be louder than shouting. It filled the Raven Hollow square as she stood with the pup in her arms, surrounded by wolves who had decided her kindness was another reason to mock her. The healer would not look at her now. The elders stood beneath the carved stone arch with their hands folded inside their sleeves, pretending not to hear. Even Alpha Grant Holloway, leader of the pack, watched from the steps of the meeting hall with a tight expression, as if Emily had embarrassed him personally by refusing to obey. "Enough," Madison said, her voice carrying cleanly through the cold air. "The royal escort will be here any minute. We are not welcoming the Alpha King with some dead stray in the middle of the square." Emily looked down at the pup. His small body seemed almost weightless now, tucked against her heart beneath the edge of her shawl. The crescent mark under his ear caught the torchlight again, so faint she wondered if anyone else could see it. "He is not a stray," she whispered. "You do not know that," Madison snapped. "And neither do you." Emily did not know. That was the truth. She did not know where he had come from, why the snow around him had been marked with strange tracks, or why the trees near the old trail looked scorched though no fire had been reported. She only knew what she had felt when she found him, a pull so deep it seemed to rise from beneath her bones. It had not sounded like words. It had felt like pleas. "Give it to me," Madison said. Emily took one step back. A few people laughed again, but uneasily this time. The wind moved through the square, tugging at cloaks, bending torch flames sideways. From beyond the northern gate came the distant rhythm of hooves on frozen ground, steady and measured, growing closer. The sound changed the pack. Backs straightened. Voices hushed. Men brushed snow from their shoulders. Women adjusted collars and silver pins. Everyone wanted to look worthy when King Alexander North entered Raven Hollow. Everyone except Emily, who could only think of the fragile weight in her arms. Madison reached for the shawl. Emily turned away, shielding the pup with her body. "Do not." The word left her softly, but something in it made Madison pause. For the first time all evening, Emily saw anger flicker beneath the other woman's smile. Not amusement, not pride. Anger that an Omega had drawn a line in front of witnesses. "You forget your place," Madison said. "No," Emily answered, her throat tight. "I remember it every day." That should have made the crowd laugh, but it did not. The words hung there, plain and painful. Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she held it back. She would not cry for them. She had cried enough in empty rooms, behind pantry doors, beside the little creek outside her mother's old cottage where no one could hear her. She bent her head and pressed her palm lightly over the pup's chest. Still nothing. Only cold fur, quiet ribs, and that impossible ache moving through her hands. "Please," she breathed, too softly for anyone but the dead pup to hear. "I am sorry they are treating you like this." The hooves were closer now, just beyond the hill road. Alpha Grant descended one step, his voice low and urgent. "Emily, put the animal aside and stand with the servants." The command was not cruel. That almost made it worse. It was the voice people used when they had already decided you were a problem to be hidden. Emily looked toward the servant line at the edge of the square, the place she had been assigned since she was old enough to carry trays. Then she looked at the pup. Something warm brushed her palm. She froze. It was gone almost instantly, but she had felt it. A flicker, a thread, a spark so small it could have been her imagination. Madison saw Emily's face change and gave a sharp laugh. "Oh, she really believes it." She turned to the crowd. "Raven Hollow, our moonless girl thinks she can call back the dead." The laughter returned, louder than before, spilling across the stones, rising into the cold sky. Emily closed her eyes. Their voices blurred together until they sounded like whined through dead leaves. She held the pup closer, not because she thought she had power, but because no living thing, no matter how small, should leave the world surrounded by cruelty. Then the clouds above the square began to thin. A pale line of moonlight slipped through, touching the edge of Emily's hair, then her shoulder, then the silver-white fur in her arms. The pup did not move. The crowd kept laughing. But under Emily's palm, something answered. For one breath, Emily forgot the square, the torches, the laughter, and the royal hooves nearing the gate. All she could feel was the faint answer beneath her palm, no stronger than a raindrop touching still water, but real enough to steal the air from her lungs. She opened her eyes and looked down. The pup remained motionless, his lashes pale against his small face, his body tucked in the hollow of her shawl. Yet the place beneath her hand had changed. It was no longer only cold. A thin warmth lived there, trembling as if afraid to be noticed. "Emily," Alpha Grant said, sharper now, "step away from the center." She heard him, but the words reached her from far away. The moonlight widened over the square, silvering the stones, turning every breath into white mist. It touched the pup's fur and seemed to gather there instead of passing over him. Emily felt the warmth climb through her fingers. It slid into her wrist, then up her arm, not painful, not frightening, but heavy with sorrow. Suddenly, she was not standing in Raven Hollow anymore. For a blink, she saw darkness between pine trees. She saw snow torn by hurried tracks. She heard a small cry swallowed by the wind. Then she saw eyes, bright and frightened, looking for someone who never came. Emily gasped and nearly staggered. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Madison's smile faltered. "She is making a scene." But her voice was quieter now. Emily drew the pup closer to her chest and lowered herself to her knees because her legs could no longer hold her. The stone was freezing through her dress. She did not care. The ache in her hands had become a pulse, matching something buried deep inside her own heart. She had felt other people's pain before, a child's fever, an old woman's stiff fingers, a frightened horse trembling under a thunderstorm. Those pains had always brushed against her gently. This was different. This felt like a door opening inside the moon itself. "Little one," she whispered, and her voice shook. "I hear you." The laughter thinned into uncertain murmurs. The healer stepped forward without meaning to, his eyes fixed on the soft glow gathering beneath Emily's palms. It was barely visible at first, like moonlight caught in water, but then it brightened, moving in narrow streams across the pup's fur. Emily did not see the crowd step back. She did not see Alpha Grant's face lose its color. She only saw the crescent mark beneath the pup's ear begin to shine. Madison took a slow step away. "That is not normal," she said. "Omegas do not carry moonfire." Moonfire. The word rippled through the square like a forbidden prayer. Emily had heard it only once, from her mother years ago, in a story told beside a kitchen stove during a winter storm. Moonfire was not a weapon. It was not a command. It was mercy made visible, the old stories said, a grace given only when a heart chose compassion over fear. Emily had thought it was a bedtime myth. Now it was threading through her fingers. The pup's small body gave the faintest twitch. Someone cried out. Emily bent over him, tears finally slipping down her cheeks, warm against the cold. "Come back," she whispered. "Not for them. Not for me. Just come back, because you were not meant to leave alone." The light pulsed once. Then again. Beneath her palm, the smallest heartbeat answered. The entire pack fell silent, so suddenly the wind seemed loud. Emily froze, afraid that if she breathed too hard, the miracle would vanish. The pup's chest rose, shallow but real. His tiny paws flexed against her sleeve. A sound broke from the healer, half disbelief, half wonder. At the edge of the square, the royal procession stopped beyond the open gate. No one cheered. No one announced the king. A line of black horses stood beneath the winter moon, their riders cloaked in dark wool and silver trim. At their center sat a man taller than the rest, even in stillness, his pale face carved with cold restraint, his eyes the color of a frozen northern lake. King Alexander North had arrived without a word, and he was looking straight at the pup breathing in Emily Carter's arms. The silence that followed King Alexander North was deeper than fear. It moved through Raven Hollow like a hard frost, touching every lowered head, every frozen hand, every smile that had died too late. Emily remained on her knees in the center of the square, one arm wrapped around the silver-white pup, the other hand still glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. She could feel the tiny heartbeat now. It was fragile, uneven, but it was there, tapping against her palm like a promise that had almost been lost. The pup drew a shallow breath and pressed his nose weakly into her shawl. Emily's own breath broke. She wanted to laugh, cry, and collapse all at once. But then the royal horses shifted beyond the gate, and every instinct in the square seemed to bow before the man who sat at their center. King Alexander did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to move quickly. He simply dismounted, and the sound of his boots touching the frozen road carried farther than any shout. He was taller than any man in Raven Hollow, dressed in a long black coat trimmed with dark fur, his shoulders broad beneath the winter cloak, his pale hair touched silver by the moon. His face was calm in a way that made calmness feel dangerous. Not cruel, not angry, controlled, like a storm held behind glass. Alpha Grant dropped to one knee. The elders followed. Then the warriors. Then almost everyone in the square. Madison lowered herself last, her face pale beneath the torchlight. Emily tried to bow too, but the pup stirred in her arms and gave the smallest sound, a weak, breathy whimper that made King Alexander stop. For the first time, something in his expression changed. It was so small most would have missed it. Emily did not. His eyes, cold blue and sharp as winter sky, fixed on the crescent mark beneath the pup's ear. One of the royal guards stepped forward, a woman with silver braids and a cloak clasp shaped like a wolf's head. Her gaze fell on the pup, and her entire body went still. "Your Majesty," she said, barely above a whisper. "That mark." King Alexander did not answer. He walked toward Emily. The crowd parted before him without being told. Every step seemed measured, yet Emily felt the distance between them vanish too quickly. Her hands tightened around the pup, not in refusal, but in fear that someone would take him before he was strong enough. The king stopped a few feet away. Up close, he seemed less like a legend and more like something carved by loneliness. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes. Snow clung to the edge of his coat. His gloved hand hung at his side, motionless, as if reaching would cost him more than any battle had. "Where did you find him?" he asked. His voice was low, rough with restraint. Emily swallowed. "In the north woods, near the burned pine trail." He was alone. A murmur shivered through the kneeling pack. King Alexander's jaw tightened. Was anyone with him? No. Emily looked down at the pup, then back up. Only tracks in the snow. I could not tell whose. The royal guard with silver braids lowered herself to one knee, but her eyes never left the small body in Emily's arms. "Sire," she said, and this time her voice trembled. "It is Prince Rowan." The world seemed to stop breathing. Emily stared at her, not understanding at first. "Prince." The word had weight. It struck the square, rolled through the bowed crowd, and left behind a silence filled with horror. Madison made a small sound behind her hand. Alpha Grant looked as if the ground had opened beneath him. The pup Emily had been ordered to throw away, the little life they had laughed at, was not a stray. He was royal blood. He was the lost son of the Northern Alpha King. Emily looked down, suddenly terrified of holding him wrong, of breathing too hard, of being unworthy of the miracle still flickering under her skin. She tried to lift him toward his father. "I am sorry. I did not know." King Alexander's gaze moved from the pup to her face. For a moment, the coldness in him broke just enough for Emily to see the father beneath the crown. "No," he said quietly. "You are the only one here who knew enough." King Alexander's words did not rise above the wind, yet they reached every corner of the square. Emily felt them land around her like a shield she had never asked for and never expected to receive. For a moment, no one moved. The torches bent in the winter air. Snow dust drifted across the stones. Prince Rowan breathed softly against her shawl, each fragile rise of his chest pulling a little more color back into the world. Emily looked down at him, then at the king standing before her, and the truth became too large to hold. This child had a father. This child had a name. This child had been searched for, mourned, feared lost. And she, Emily Carter, the moonless Omega of Raven Hollow, had carried him through the square while people laughed. Her throat tightened with shame that was not hers to carry. "Your Majesty," Alpha Grant said carefully from where he knelt, his voice polished thin with panic. "Had we known the pup was of royal blood, of course we would have acted with proper care." The king did not look at him. That was the first punishment. Not a growl, not a threat, only the complete absence of attention from a man whose attention could change a life. "Proper care," King Alexander repeated, his eyes still on Emily and the child in her arms. Madison lowered her head, but Emily could see her hands trembling against her red cloak. "We all thought he was gone," Madison said quickly. "No one meant disrespect. She came in making a spectacle, and we were only trying to protect the ceremony." Emily felt those words brush against old wounds. Making a spectacle, as if compassion became shameful when seen by too many people. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but Prince Rowan stirred. His tiny paw pressed against her wrist, weak but deliberate. The faint moonlight still glimmered over his fur, and when Emily adjusted the shawl around him, the soft glow under her fingers answered again. The royal guard with silver braids noticed. Her eyes widened. "Sire," she whispered, "the moonfire remains with her." A second murmur passed through the pack, lower than the first, threaded with fear and wonder. Emily looked at her hands. The light was fading, but not gone. It rested beneath her skin like starlight trapped in water. "I do not know what it is," Emily said, barely able to speak. "I only wanted him to be warm." King Alexander's face changed again, not enough for the crowd, but enough for her. His cold blue eyes softened around the edges. He removed one glove slowly, as though every movement had to be controlled, then extended his bare hand toward Prince Rowan. The pup opened his eyes. They were pale gold, clouded with exhaustion, but alive. A sound went through the royal guard, something close to relief. The king's hand stopped inches from his son. He did not snatch him away. He did not command Emily to surrender him. He waited. That waiting undid something inside her. Powerful men in Raven Hollow had always taken space, taken words, taken decisions before she could reach them. But this king, this feared ruler from the northern territories, waited for an Omega to be ready. Emily carefully shifted Prince Rowan toward him. "He should be with you." The pup whimpered. His small body turned back toward her, pressing into the fold of her shawl with surprising determination. Emily froze. The square froze with her. King Alexander stared at his son, then at Emily. The silence became almost unbearable. "He knows your scent," the silver-braided guard said softly. He crossed close to death and came back through her hands. "A child remembers the door that opened." Emily's eyes burned. "I do not want to keep him from you." "You are not," the king said. His voice was quieter now, meant only for the few nearest them, but the square listened anyway. "You are the reason I can stand before him at all." He turned at last toward Alpha Grant, and the temperature of the moment seemed to drop. "Who ordered her to discard my son?" No one answered. Madison's face went white. Alpha Grant lowered his head further. "There was confusion, Your Majesty." "No," King Alexander said. "There was character. Confusion hides what people do not understand. Character reveals what they choose when they believe no one important is watching." Emily felt those words move through the square like the toll of a bell. For the first time in her life, the laughter around her had nowhere to go. It curled back on those who had given it breath. Madison looked at Emily then, not with pity, not with kindness, but with the stunned fear of someone realizing the person beneath her foot had been standing at the center of fate all along. King Alexander unclasped the black cloak from his shoulders and stepped closer. Emily lowered her eyes, expecting him to wrap the child. Instead, he placed the heavy cloak gently around her shoulders, covering her thin gray dress, shielding both her and Prince Rowan from the snow. The warmth of it startled her. So did the silence that followed. "From this moment," the king said, his voice carrying clearly now, "Emily Carter is under the protection of the Northern Crown." Prince Rowan sighed against her chest, as if the words had settled him. Emily looked up at the king through the falling snow, and for the first time, she wondered whether the moon had not simply answered her mercy. Perhaps it had been leading him to her all along. The words "under the protection of the Northern Crown" changed the square more completely than the moonfire had. Wolves who had laughed at Emily only minutes before now lowered their eyes, as if her gray dress had become a royal banner. She did not feel royal. She felt cold, shaken, and suddenly too visible beneath King Alexander's heavy cloak. The black wool smelled faintly of cedar, snow, and northern pine, a clean winter scent that steadied her in a way she did not understand. Prince Rowan slept against her chest, his small breaths warming the inside of her shawl. Every now and then his paw flexed against her sleeve, as if checking that she was still there. "Bring the royal physician," King Alexander said. The silver-braided guard turned at once, but the king lifted one hand. Quietly, "Do not crowd him." That small command told Emily more about him than any legend ever had. People in Raven Hollow used power like a door slammed shut. Alexander used it like a wall raised around something fragile. The physician hurried from the royal escort, an older man with a leather case and kind, careful hands. He knelt beside Emily, not above her, and waited until she nodded before touching the pup. "His breathing is weak but stable," he said after a moment. "No fever, no darkening of the veins. Whatever pulled him back did not injure him." His eyes moved to Emily's hands with open wonder. It healed clean. Emily tucked her fingers into the cloak, embarrassed by the attention. "I did not mean to do anything strange." The physician gave her a gentle look. Mercy is only strange to those who have forgotten it. Madison's breath caught audibly, but no one looked at her. That, Emily realized, was the second punishment. Not humiliation. Erasure. The same cold invisibility Madison had once wished on her now settled around Madison herself. Alpha Grant tried again, his voice controlled but strained. Your Majesty, Ravenhollow will offer every resource to aid the prince. Our guest chambers, our healer, our guards, anything the crown requires. King Alexander finally faced him fully. The pack Alpha seemed to shrink without moving. My son crossed your border in distress, Alexander said. Your people saw a helpless child and measured his worth by whether he mattered to someone powerful. Alpha Grant said nothing. The king's gaze moved across the kneeling crowd, slow and exact. Remember this night. Not because royal blood was found here, but because an Omega showed more honor than those who claimed rank above her. Emily's heart beat painfully fast. She wanted to disappear from the weight of so many eyes, but Prince Rowan stirred and made a tiny sound of protest when she tensed. Instinctively, she soothed him with a whisper. It is all right. I have you. The pup settled at once. King Alexander heard her. She knew because his expression changed again, a quiet fracture in all that northern ice. He looked less like a ruler then, and more like a father hearing his child comforted by someone else and being grateful enough for it to hurt. Miss Carter, he said. Her name in his voice sounded unfamiliar, almost important. Will you come with us to North Haven tonight? The square seemed to inhale. Emily looked up sharply. To the capital? To the royal infirmary. Rowan trusts you. Until he is strong enough to be moved without fear, I will not separate him from the person who brought him back. Emily thought of her tiny room behind the laundry house, of the narrow cot, the cracked window, the life where no one expected her to be anything but useful and quiet. Then she looked at the faces around her, waiting to see whether she would refuse the impossible. I have never left Ravenhollow, she admitted. Then Ravenhollow has been smaller than your fate, Alexander said. The words were not soft, but they were not unkind. Emily lowered her eyes to Prince Rowan. The pup opened them briefly, pale gold and trusting, then pressed closer to her. That decided what fear could not. I will go, she whispered. A murmur spread through the pack, but King Alexander silenced it with a look. He stepped aside, giving Emily room to rise without touching her or rushing her. She stood slowly, wrapped in the king's cloak, holding his son beneath the moon that had chosen to answer her. As she walked toward the royal horses, Madison remained kneeling in the snow, and Emily passed her without a word. Not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time in her life, she did not need Madison to hear her in order to know she existed. The royal escort moved out of Ravenhollow beneath a sky washed in silver, leaving the square behind as if it belonged to another lifetime. Emily rode in a covered carriage lined with dark wool blankets. Prince Rowan nestled against her lap, while the royal physician sat across from her, checking the pup's breathing every few minutes with a patience that made the silence feel safe. Outside, hooves struck the frozen road in a steady rhythm. Pine branches brushed the carriage roof. Through the small window, Emily saw the black shape of King Alexander riding beside them, tall and unmoving on a midnight horse, his cloak gone from his shoulders because it was still wrapped around her. No one had asked for it back. That unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. In Ravenhollow, anything warm was temporary. A kind word, a full meal, a place near the fire. Comfort was something given only until someone remembered she had not earned it. But the king's cloak remained heavy around her shoulders, proof that for one night at least, someone powerful had chosen not to look away. Prince Rowan stirred in his sleep and made a soft sound. Emily bent over him at once. I am here, she whispered. His breathing steadied. The physician watched with quiet amazement. He responds to you faster than to medicine. Emily brushed one finger lightly over the crescent mark beneath Rowan's ear. The glow had faded, but the mark still seemed warmer than the rest of him. Why was he alone? She asked before she could stop herself. The physician's expression changed. He glanced toward the window, toward the king riding in silence. The prince disappeared 3 nights ago from a guarded winter camp near the border. There was confusion during a storm. His trail vanished before dawn. Emily looked down at Rowan, imagining the small pup in the cold woods, searching for a voice he knew. Her chest tightened. His Majesty must have been terrified. The physician folded his hands over his leather case. The North does not often see its king afraid, but every rider in the escort has heard him call the prince's name into the dark for 3 nights. Emily turned toward the window again. Alexander's profile was cut against the moonlit trees, beautiful in the severe way of mountains and winter rivers, but now she could not see only coldness. She saw exhaustion. She saw restraint stretched thin over grief. As if sensing her gaze, the king looked toward the carriage. Their eyes met through the glass. Emily quickly lowered hers, but not before warmth moved under her skin, the same strange shimmer that had woken in the square. Prince Rowan opened his eyes. Pale gold focused on her, clearer than before. His tiny nose pressed into her palm. Then, faint as a breath, a voice brushed the edge of Emily's mind. Safe. She went still. The physician noticed. Miss Carter. Emily could not answer. The word had not come through her ears. It had bloomed inside her, innocent and trusting, carrying the scent of snow, milk, and moonlight. Rowan blinked at her, then tucked his head back into the blanket. Emily's hands trembled. Omegas and Raven Hollow did not mind speak with royal children. They did not carry moonfire. They did not leave in royal carriages beneath the protection of kings. Yet all 3 had happened before midnight. The carriage slowed as the road climbed toward the northern ridge. Beyond the trees, the first lights of North Haven appeared in the distance, scattered across the mountainside like stars caught on earth. Towers rose behind them, pale stone and black iron, the royal citadel watching over the valley. Emily had heard stories of it since childhood, but none had prepared her for how lonely it looked, so grand and so guarded, a fortress built not only to protect a kingdom, but to hide a wounded heart. The carriage stopped at a lantern station halfway up the ridge. The door opened, and cold air swept in with King Alexander standing beyond it. How is he? He asked. The physician answered first. Stronger, Your Majesty. Still fragile, but improving. Alexander's gaze moved to Emily. And you? No one had asked that all night. Not truly. Emily held the cloak tighter around herself. I am all right. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but as if he recognized the lie because he had used it often. North Haven is not Raven Hollow, he said quietly. In my house, you may be tired. You may be frightened. You may say so. Emily looked at him, the moonlight silvering the edges of his pale hair, and felt the world shift again, not with magic this time, but with the dangerous tenderness of being believed. Before she could answer, Prince Rowan lifted his head and gave a tiny sound toward his father. Alexander stepped closer, his face changing with a relief too deep for words. The pup reached one small paw toward him, but his other paw stayed curled in Emily's sleeve. The king looked at that, then at her. In the cold between them, something unspoken took root. Not a command, not a debt, a bond neither of them yet had the courage to name. North Haven rose from the mountains like a crown carved out of winter. Its outer walls were pale stone veined with black, its towers sharp against the moonlit sky, its windows glowing amber through curtains of falling snow. Emily had imagined the royal citadel would feel cold, but as the carriage passed beneath the iron gate, she felt something older than cold pressing around her. Memory lived here. Grief lived here. Hope had been locked away here and guarded by men with silver wolf crests on their chests. The moment the carriage stopped in the inner courtyard, servants and physicians hurried forward with lanterns, blankets, and quiet voices. No one laughed. No one pointed at Emily's worn shoes beneath the king's cloak. They looked first at Prince Rowan, then at the king, then at her with careful respect, as if the cloak around her shoulders had explained what words had not. King Alexander opened the carriage door himself. The gesture sent a ripple through the waiting staff, but he ignored it. Slowly, he said, not to command her, but to steady her. Emily gathered Rowan close and stepped down. Her legs ached from the ride and the long cold night, but the pup's warmth against her chest kept her standing. He was breathing easier now, though his small body still seemed too light. The royal physician led them through wide doors into a hall lined with dark wood and silver banners. The citadel smelled of pine smoke, polished stone, and winter herbs. Emily had never walked on floors that shone enough to reflect torchlight. Every step made her aware of the mud on the hem of her dress, the loosened braid over her shoulder, the dried snow on her sleeves. She tried to pull the cloak tighter around herself, but Alexander noticed. "No one here will shame you for surviving the night," he said quietly. Emily looked at him, startled. He did not look away. "People who care more about clean hymns than wounded children do not remain in my service." The words were simple, but they settled somewhere deep inside her. At the infirmary, the physicians prepared a small warmed bed near the hearth. Emily carefully lowered Rowan onto it, but the pup stirred at once, making a small distressed sound and pawing toward her sleeve. She froze, helpless. Alexander stepped closer, his face controlled, but his eyes fixed on his son with aching focus. "Rowan," he said softly. The pup turned his head toward the voice, then back toward Emily. One paw stayed reaching for her. The room went still. The oldest physician, a white-haired woman with sharp eyes, studied Emily's hands. "The bond may be temporary," she said. "A life returned through moonfire often clings to the first safe presence it recognizes." Emily's pulse fluttered. "Temporary," she repeated, though she was not sure whether the word comforted or hurt. Alexander heard the slight break in it. "Nothing will be taken from him tonight," he said, "and nothing will be taken from you." The old physician looked between them, thoughtful. Then she should sit beside him until dawn. Emily expected someone to object. No one did. A chair was brought near the hearth, and she sat with Rowan's paw resting against her fingers. Warmth from the fire touched her face. Exhaustion moved through her at last, heavy and slow, but she fought it. This place was too unfamiliar, too grand, too impossible. Alexander stood on the other side of the bed, one hand resting lightly on the carved rail. He looked at Rowan as if memorizing every breath. "I searched 3 nights," he said after a long silence. His voice was low enough that only Emily and the physicians nearest them could hear. "I thought the North had taken him from me." Emily looked down at the sleeping pup. "He was calling," she whispered. Alexander's gaze lifted to her. "You heard him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Not with my ears." "Not exactly." "In the woods, and again in the carriage." He said safe. The old physician drew in a careful breath. Alexander became very still. "Royal children do not mind speak with strangers," the physician said softly. Emily's hand tightened around the edge of the chair. "Then what does that mean?" No one answered quickly. The fire cracked in the silence. Outside the infirmary windows, dawn had not yet touched the mountains, but the moon hung full and bright above North Haven, pouring silver light across the floor. It reached Emily's hand first, then Rowan's paw, then the place where their fingers and fur touched. A thin glow awakened between them, gentle and unmistakable. Alexander looked at the light, and the last trace of doubt left his face. "It means," he said slowly, as if the truth cost him breath, "the moon did not only return my son tonight. It brought him home through you." Emily wanted to deny it, to say she was only an Omega from Raven Hollow, only a girl who had carried what everyone else refused to touch. But Rowan sighed in his sleep, and the glow brightened as if answering for her. Across the bed, the Alpha King lowered his head, not in command, not in suspicion, but in reverence before the quiet power she had never known she carried. By the time dawn touched the mountains, North Haven had fallen into a silence that felt almost holy. The infirmary fire had burned low, painting the stone walls in soft amber, while snow drifted beyond the tall windows. Emily sat beside Prince Rowan's warmed bed with one hand resting near his paw, afraid to move too far from the fragile glow that had carried him through the night. He slept deeply now, no longer shivering, no longer caught between breath and stillness. Every rise of his small chest felt like a bell ringing quietly inside her heart. Across from her, King Alexander had not left once. Servants had come and gone with reports, blankets, and steaming cups of tea, but he remained beside his son, tall and watchful, his pale face carved by exhaustion and relief. He looked less like the feared Northern Alpha King in that hour, and more like a man who had spent 3 nights bargaining with darkness and had finally been given back the only answer he wanted. Emily's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she kept them open. If this was a dream, she wanted to remember every part before waking in her narrow room behind the Raven Hollow laundry house. The old physician checked Rowan one last time as the first line of sunlight touched the floor. Her stern face softened. "The prince is stable," she said. "His strength is returning. By evening, he may be able to shift back safely." The breath that left Alexander sounded almost painful. He bowed his head over the bed, one hand closing around the wooden rail. "Thank you," he said. The physician looked at Emily. "Thank her, Your Majesty." Emily lowered her gaze at once, heat rising in her cheeks. "Please do not. I only did what anyone should have done." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. That is why it mattered. The words were gentle, but they struck deeper than praise. Emily thought of Raven Hollow, of laughter on frozen stones, of Madison's red cloak, of all the eyes that had watched a helpless child, and decided compassion was foolish because they did not know he was royal. She had not known either. That was the part that made her hands tremble. She had held him when he was nameless. She had begged for him when he had no title. She had loved him for one desperate night, simply because he was small and alone. Rowan stirred. His eyes opened, clearer now, pale gold brightening in the dawn. He looked first at his father. Alexander went completely still. The pup gave a tiny sound, then reached one paw toward him. The king bent closer, and when his hand touched his son's fur, the last ice around his expression broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for Emily to see grief loosen its grip. Rowan then turned his head toward her and pressed his other paw over her fingers. Safe. The word brushed through her mind again, sleepy and sure. Emily's breath caught. Alexander saw her face. "He spoke to you again." She nodded. He said safe. The king closed his eyes briefly, as if the word had entered him too. When he opened them, his gaze was steady. "Then the North owes you more than protection." Emily shook her head. "I do not want payment. I did not offer payment." He stood slowly, and every person in the infirmary seemed to feel the shift before he spoke. The physician stepped back. The guards near the door lowered their heads. Alexander removed a silver ring from his hand, one marked with the crest of the Northern Crown, and placed it on the small table beside Emily, not forcing it into her palm, not making a spectacle of the gift. "This is not a reward," he said. "It is a promise. As long as you carry this, every door in my kingdom opens to you. No pack may claim you as lesser. No alpha may silence you by rank. No voice may call you cursed under my law." Emily stared at the ring through a blur of tears. For years, she had wanted only to be left in peace. Now a king was offering her a place in a world larger than every insult she had survived. "Why?" she whispered. Alexander looked at Rowan, then back at her. "Because last night, when my son had nothing to give and no name you recognized, you chose him. The moon saw it. So did I." Sunlight spread across the infirmary floor, meeting the last silver of the moon. For a brief moment, both lights touched Emily at once. The ring gleamed beside her hand. Rowan slept between them, one paw still resting against her fingers and one tucked beneath his father's palm. Emily did not know what she was to the king, or what the moon had awakened inside her, or why the sight of Alexander's quiet gratitude made her heart ache with something warmer than fear. She only knew that Raven Hollow was behind her, North Haven was before her, and for the first time in her life, she was not being carried by pity or pushed by shame. She was being called by destiny.